Hello and welcome to the AWS and VMware webinar series. So this is an ongoing series where today we're going to go into a deep dive into VMware Cloud on AWS cloud migration use cases. My name is Samir Kadu. I'm a partner solutions architect at AWS, and joined with me is Brian Graff, technical marketing architect at VMware. So today we'll discuss an introduction to VMware Cloud on AWS, the benefits and use cases, workload migration, as we'll go through several demos, customer success, and then we'll wrap up. So customers are seeking an integrated and hybrid approach. For some customers, hybrid is the preferred operating model. So with this jointly engineered solution between VMware and AWS, on-premises, you have the use of familiar tools and processes. You're leveraging existing investments, maintain unique hardware configurations, have granular control over placement of applications and data. And then in the public cloud, you're able to scale faster, reduce costs, establish a global footprint, pay as you go, access broader range of services. As customers move to the cloud, they're looking for ways to get the most of both worlds without having to buy any new hardware. So there's common challenges with the hybrid cloud adoption. For example, having to work with multiple virtual machine formats. You might have incongruent networks. You might have operational inconsistency. And then having to learn new skill sets and utilize new tools, having multiple control and monitoring mechanisms. So with this solution, we're looking to eliminate all these issues. So from a VM format, you'll be able to use the same familiar VMs that you have on premises with VMware Cloud on AWS. You're able to extend your networks, so you're no longer having to deal with incongruent networks. As far as operational inconsistency, you now have that operational consistency where the same look and feel of VMware that you're utilizing on premises is same with VMware Cloud on AWS. And then also, you get to utilize the same skill sets and tools that you utilize today with VMware Cloud on AWS. And any type of monitoring mechanisms that you're using to control your environment, you can leverage that as well. So with VMware Cloud on AWS, it has VMware's compute, storage, networking, and security delivered as a cloud service. VMware capabilities and cloud infrastructure sold as a combined VMware offering. Unit of purchase is physical hosts with VMware software. And then the minimum purchase is 4 hosts, and you can add additional hosts as far as needed. And you can do that in increments of 1 host at a time as well. So this is VMware software plus AWS's infrastructure, which gives you VMware Cloud on AWS. So with VMware Cloud on AWS, you can see where you have AWS's compute, storage, networking. Then on top of that resides ESXi on the bare metal hosts. Then you have your vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. So AWS helps to provide that global reach, expanding over time jointly with VMware Cloud on AWS. So originally, we first started in our Oregon region, the US West. Then we made this available in Northern Virginia as well. Then in around the March timeframe, this was made available in London, and now it's available in Frankfurt as well. So we're looking to expand this service over time. So if there's any particular regions that you would like this service to be brought to, please do let us know and share that with us. So there is support by third-party infrastructure partners, which is growing every day. So for example, from data protection, you have Dell EMC, Druva, Veeam. Then there's the storage side of it with NetApp networking with F5 as well. Direct Connect partners such as CenturyLink, DataPipe Level 3, and then also with key management, Gemalto, HITRUST. And then from a security standpoint, for example, the Checkpoint, Fortinet, McAfee, Trend Micro, Palo Alto. From TCO assessment providers and tools, you have Cloud Checker, Cloud Physics, Risk Networks, Cloud Migration Services through Cloud Velox, Micro Focus, and then also with DevOps, for example, with Chef, CloudBees, Dynatrace, Puppet, and even Splunk. So now I'll hand it over to Brian to go on to the next section.
Great, thank you, Samir. So
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about use cases. So in an on-premises environment, we found that an average of 86 days was the amount of time it would take for a lot of our customers to go and from the time that they've been forecasting that they need more hardware, more infrastructure, to acquiring the budget, ordering the hardware, receiving it at the data center, having it racked and stacked, and having it configured. Okay, we've had some customers that said, oh, whatever, we can do that in about a half that time. We've had others that say only 3 months. It takes us 6 to 8 months. So we actually see a very wide range of variance here. But the point I want to get across is that for an on-premises environment, with IT growing and expanding so quickly at such a rapid pace, that trying to forecast out and have infrastructure ready for your consumption in a timely manner is just very difficult to do. Leveraging something like VMware Cloud on AWS allows us to take this and shrink that 86 days down to about 10 minutes. What that allows you to do is that really allows you to change your CapEx to OpEx. Instead of purchasing your servers on-prem and having to forecast that out, your forecasts only need to include up to about 10 minutes of time. Because VMware Cloud on AWS can take advantage of the AWS APIs and bring in hosts as needed. And conversely, as they're not needed, we can spin those back out into the cloud and you only pay for what you need. So instead of having to have a ton of additional resources in your on-prem environment and just waiting to see if you need them or not, and it's just sitting there as an expense, you can leverage something like this in the hybrid cloud that allows you to get that additional infrastructure in mere minutes. So let's talk about some of the benefits. Okay, we talk a lot about hybrid cloud and how VMware Cloud and AWS is that hybrid cloud that is meant for you, the customer. And we don't say that lightly. One of the reasons, let's go through these with accelerating innovation, because we have the ability to tie into AWS services. Okay, we can tie in natively into things such as S3, EC2, RDS, and many other AWS services. We have faster application development. Okay, and what I mean by that is you've most likely been using VMware for a number of years. You're comfortable with it. You've been creating applications and running your infrastructure on VMware. When you move that to the cloud, you shouldn't have to change all those processes. You want to be able to continue using the same processes and tools that you were using on-prem. Otherwise, it's going to slow you down, at least temporarily, until you get up to speed on how to use these other tools. We have the ability, like I said before, to have on-demand access to that capacity. If you need more hosts, you can spin them up. If you don't need them, you can spin them down and you use them when you need them. We can respond faster to change. We'll talk a little bit about this with mobility later on in this slide deck, but some of the features that we have help accelerate the ability to evacuate on-prem data centers or migrate from an on-prem data center up to VMware Cloud on AWS. We really try and shrink down the amount of effort and time it takes to do those types of migrations. And the great thing about this, like I said before, is you can use VMware Cloud on AWS and it's vSphere in the cloud. Obviously, we have a number of differences and benefits to doing that. But if you're comfortable and you're used to using vCenter and vSphere, you can use that in the cloud. Optimizing costs, we pretty much talked about, so I'll continue on here. So as we talk with a lot of our customers and we get all their use cases and all the different situations that our customers are in when it comes to moving to VMware Cloud on AWS, it really boiled down into fitting into 3 specific use cases. Our customers were either doing cloud migrations, so evacuating data centers, evacuating colos, maybe they were ready for an infrastructure refresh, and instead of going ahead and buying new servers that would last for another 4 years for them, they decided to move those workloads up to the cloud. We see the data center extension, same type of a thing, being able to continue to have your on-prem environment, but also expand up into the cloud. That way, you as the customer don't have to worry about purchasing more hardware, more infrastructure on-prem. You can continue to burst that up and expand that into your cloud footprint. And people use this a lot for test and dev. Like we said before, it's vSphere, so your customers can run or you as the customer can run your applications or your test dev environments in the cloud and bring those applications back down once you've tested them and use them on-prem. Or at the same time, you could move them into production there in the cloud as well. You have plenty of different options. The third use case that we see is around DR, disaster recovery. What this allows our customers to do is have a DR site where they have minimal hosts, but that can spin up additional hosts very quickly if needed. So for a lot of customers who are running either a hot DR site with the same number of hosts as they have on-prem, or even 70 or 80% of the hosts, that's a huge cost, not only in the capital expenditures, but in all the additional licensing and data center footprint and everything else that you have to take care of. So a lot of our customers are seeing how VMware Cloud on AWS helps fit the need in this DR space. So really it comes down to, for our customers, which of these use cases do you fall into, or what exactly is your need right now? We have a lot of different ways that we can have workload portability. And that's obviously the reason for this webcast. Well, now I'm going to go down the side of this. We have 3 different ways that we like to talk about. The first one is hybrid cloud extension, or HCX. We have live migrations, which include vMotion. We have cold migrations, which is powering down a virtual machine and migrating it. You can leverage the same workflow or steps as you do for a vMotion, but it's done with a cold virtual machine. As you can see here in the middle of the screen, our vCenters are connected. VMware Cloud on AWS has this great feature called hybrid linked mode. And hybrid linked mode allows you to link your on-prem environment to your cloud SDDC and share the same identity store. So I can log into VMware Cloud on AWS using my credentials from my on-prem environment. And once I log in, I can see all the vCenters that are linked in that SSO domain on-prem. And at the same time, I can work with those. So you have the visibility, you have a single pane of glass that will allow you to better manage both your on-prem environment and your cloud environment at the same time. When it comes to things such as templates and ISOs and scripts, we all have those data stores. I know that the majority of us, I should say, have those data stores that have a folder in that data store named ISOs, and you go into that and you have just a pile of ISOs and templates, and you maybe have a second data store with the same thing, and you get this ISO sprawl. And that's compounded when you have multiple sites. Being able to leverage something like Content Library allows you to create one content library that is a publisher, most likely from your on-prem environment, that includes all of your templates and scripts and ISOs. And you can publish that out to other vCenter servers. Now, in this case, you can publish this out to your vCenter server in VMware Cloud on AWS and start syncing all of your gold builds to the cloud that are ready for consumption very, very quickly. So not only is this workload mobility, but it's also time to value. EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility. So EVC is what is used when you have different processors from different families or generations, and it finds the lowest common denominator to run across the board for the virtual machines. Now, up until now, EVC was something that you had to set at the cluster level, meaning that if you had to accommodate for 1 or 2 virtual machines that were on a different CPU set, or an additional host, it's affecting the entire cluster. Now with VMware Cloud on AWS, this is a per VM functionality. So EVC is now per VM instead of at the cluster level, meaning that you can take advantage of all the features of the cluster for all the virtual machines that want it, minus the 1 or 2 or 3 or however many you have that maybe need EVC mode enabled. So let's talk about how we decide to get everything up to the cloud. So really, I think a lot of us like the idea of being able to vMotion everything to the cloud. Leave everything running, have 0 downtime, and just vMotion everything. Wouldn't that be simple? Wouldn't that be awesome? And to some extent, that's true. You can do that with a number of your workloads. but some workloads maybe aren't as desirable to do that with. For example, some of the databases. If you have high transactional databases that are churning data or receiving data at a pretty fast rate, vMotion is probably not the best solution for you, because vMotion has to also transfer over all the deltas that are created or that change from the time that vMotion starts. So if you have a large VM and it has a lot of different transactions, it's going to take an extremely long amount of time for it to actually be able to vMotion that virtual machine completely. So maybe those types of workloads aren't the best for vMotion. So what we like to look at is, how do we bucketize or tag these virtual machines so that we know the best way to move them to the cloud? The easiest way to do this, I think, is to have 3 different buckets. We have those that can incur downtime. Those are ones that we could potentially do something like a cold migration. These are ones that we could maybe ship to the cloud and using Amazon Snowball. Maybe this is leveraging some other type of application, third-party application, to replicate these up. You have those with no downtime on the right, and those are the ones that can't incur any downtime. vMotion is probably a great solution there. We also have HCX, which we'll talk about, and low downtime are those that we can incur a little bit, but we don't really want to if we don't have to. So the idea here is that you can go ahead and choose or do a analysis on your environment and see where you can put all these different workloads. Being able to then bucketize them and prioritize your applications and which ones move is very helpful. So here's a little chart to help kind of digest this and figure out the best way to do this. Now, if we start on the left-hand side, this is for workloads that can incur some downtime. So if they can incur some downtime, we look at cold migrations. On the on-premises side, we can have standard or distributed switches, vSphere 6.0 or higher. On the Cloud SDDC side, or the VMware Cloud on AWS side, we just have to ensure that IPsec VPN is configured and set up to link to our on-prem environment, and the firewall is configured to allow vMotion traffic through, which is the same ports as the cold migration. On the right-hand side, for the workloads that cannot incur downtime, we look at things like vMotion. And on the on-prem side, it does require a distributed switch. Notice that it does not allow you to have a standard switch there. So you need to have VM compatibility at version 9 or higher, and a distributed switch. On the Cloud SDDC side, we have a few additional requirements. One is a layer 2 VPN. There's a few different ways that you can set that up. You can leverage NSX. You can leverage a bespoke NSX Edge appliance, which for customers who do not have NSX in their environment can get the Edge appliance for free. You can download that from myvmware.com and set that up and leverage that to stretch your layer 2 network. Otherwise, if you tried to vMotion your workloads, the routing would not work once it came to the Cloud SDDC side, and you would then essentially remove all of the reasons for leveraging vMotion. The other thing that we have here is Direct Connect. So you can use Direct Connect with a public virtual interface VIF or a private VIF. And those are the requirements that we have for vMotion. Now, like we said, there's one other option in there with low downtime, and that option is replication leveraging HCX. HCX will not only allow you to replicate, it will allow you to do cold migrations and vMotions as well. But one of the great things about HCX is it can do a replication assisted vMotion, essentially, where it will go ahead and it will migrate all of the data up that it needs to, and then you can schedule when you want the VM to actually switch over to the cloud, and it just requires a restart of that virtual machine. So when we say low downtime, we're talking potentially just a couple of minutes. So as far as you're concerned, as you're sitting here and thinking about this, and as we talk about this, how can this help you? What are some of the applications for VMware Cloud on AWS for you right now? Now, the answer may not be at this very minute that you are in a place to go out and purchase VMware Cloud on AWS. Maybe you are not. But as you're looking at your cloud strategy, what are your next steps? What are your next steps when the data center lease expires, when you have hardware refreshes, as you continue to grow your infrastructure? VMware Cloud on AWS is a great solution for you. Samir, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Yeah, sure. So let's get into some of the challenges in Oracle workloads migrating to the cloud. So for example, you might have a complicated Oracle application that has to go through refactoring. You might have difficulty deploying Oracle RAC. You might have some performance risk that comes into play. It might be hard to modernize certain applications. And then also there might be unexpected costs that come with it as well. So we're looking to help you as far as migrating certain workloads, even Oracle workloads, to the cloud and eliminate some of these issues for you through VMware Cloud on AWS. So what happens is you do have several options as far as with VMware Cloud on AWS as far as workloads you want to utilize. You can obviously go the route if you want to migrate Oracle. That's certainly the case, and it's possible. You pretty much can do a straight vMotion if you already have your Oracle environment existing in your on-premises VMware environment. So you can vMotion that over to VMware Cloud on AWS, and you don't have to go through any refactoring. You don't have to go through any particular complicated issues that come with deploying Oracle RAC. As far as performance, pretty much the same performance that you're leveraging on premises. You won't be seeing any differences as far as a hit to that or anything. And then you're able to modernize your applications in this case because now you're moving it to a cloud-based environment where you can utilize other services as well. And then from a cost perspective, you can predict the costs that are associated to this type of migration as you're openly aware of the costs related to VMware Cloud and AWS. So some of the top 5 reasons why Oracle on VMware Cloud and AWS makes sense is it's allowing that seamless large-scale migration without refactoring. It's easy to utilize Oracle RAC in the deployment fashion as well, so you can easily deploy it. It's similar to vSphere, high performance. And then, as I said earlier, as far as application modernization with AWS services, and it does follow that same licensing as vSphere already as well. So you do have the option as well as leveraging Oracle workloads in your on-premises VMware-based environment and also in VMware Cloud and AWS. And you do have the flexibility to move that back and forth as needed as well. And then again, leveraging other AWS services. If you do want to go that route, you do have the option to do that as well if you need to utilize any of the native services to help refactor your application or even add enhancements or features to your application stack as well. So with the seamless large-scale migration without refactoring, why would Oracle workloads on VMware Cloud on AWS make sense? So as far as migration challenges, difficult application re-architecture, complex VM conversions, complicated mass migration, impossible bidirectional migration, and extremely expensive. So as you can see, we are eliminating those challenges. You're able to utilize the same architecture that you have. You don't have to worry about any VM conversions. You can still go through a mass migration easily with the tools that are available to you. So either you can utilize either stretching your network and taking care of live vMotions, or if you want to utilize HCX, that is an option as well. And then you do have the option to bidirectionally vMotion your VMs as needed as well. And then from a cost perspective, you do have insight to what your cost is as well. And with VMware Cloud on AWS solutions, it's going to have that cloud migration with powered off VMs, vMotion live VMs without any downtime, the hybrid cloud extension or HCX, as I mentioned, for bulk migrations. Also, the availability with utilizing Direct Connect for high-speed, reliable, and private network connectivity. Some of the benefits, as mentioned before, you don't have to re-architect your applications. There's no need for any conversion. So your VM resides as a VM. You don't have to change that. You don't have to go through any conversion process. It's still that same VM. And then you have that seamless bidirectional migration that can take place between on-premises with your VMware stack to VMware Cloud on AWS. And then also you can lower your TCO by utilizing vMotion, and also HCX is free with VMware Cloud on AWS. So as far as use cases with VMware Cloud on AWS, we'll go through, for example, with the live migration firewall rules that you need to set up. So let's say, for example, your VM remains powered on, your source to destination. You do have to have the bandwidth requirement of 250 or 250 megabits per second. Latency also, 100 milliseconds round trip. Networking, IPsec VPN to management gateway. You can leverage that layer 2 VPN, even a direct connect, a distributed switch, 6.0 and higher. And then also standard switches, if you do have those, you do have the option to leverage that. And then with firewall rules, you do have to take that into account as well. So I just wanted to go through where there is a link to this as well. So if you see this bit.ly link down here, that will take you to the information in regard to the firewall rules as well. And then with VM compatibility, version 9, and then also take into account the EVC considerations as well. Let's dive into this a bit. So when you look at it, you do have the option to pretty much set up your source and destination, your firewall rules as needed as well. You do have that full flexibility. Your VMs are going to reside in that compute gateway that exists over here. You can set up your logical networks for your VMs. If you want to assign any public IPs to your VMs, you do have that option as well. So to control the firewall rules, you would go over here where the section is for your firewall rules. And then by clicking on actions, you would have the various options that are available to you from that standpoint. And then if you wanted to go through the setup for VPN connectivity, as far as having an IPsec VPN to management gateway, or even if you wanted to leverage layer 2 VPN, you do have the option to leverage that as well from the GUI as well. So as far as the required firewall rules for vMotion, you do have to take that into account. So for example, some of the use cases, if you want to provide access to vCenter server from on-premises, you do have to set up access in regards to that. Maybe you want to allow outbound vCenter access to on-premises vCenter server. So you do have to set that up as well. So again, you can see the same pretty typical format that you're used to today with having a source, destination, and a service as well. So you do have to specify those. That will allow you to have that connectivity. Maybe you want to even have where you're allowing SSO, vCenter server, to connect and be utilized in this situation. So you can utilize it from your on-premises deployment to VMware Cloud on AWS. Maybe you want to have ESXi NFC traffic take place as well. So you do have the option between your on-premises ESXi VM kernel networks with ESXi and VMware Cloud on AWS as well, and then allowing outbound ESXi access to on-premises. Again, you can see where you do have to specify your source, destination, and in this case, it would be all traffic or any traffic in this case. And then also with your on-premises firewall rules for vMotion, you do have to set that up as well. So again, the same considerations that come into play as far as having that action to have the allow rule take place. You do have to specify your source. You do have to specify your destination. Again, the service has to be specified and even the ports. So you do have granular controls around this. So maybe you want to have on-premises to vCenter server. You do have that option available to you. Maybe you want to have remote ESXi provisioning available to you. Maybe you want to have Cloud SDDC to on-premises vCenter server as set to allow. You do have that option as well. Maybe you want to have a Cloud SDDC to ESXi remote console, where maybe you're managing your VMs from that standpoint. You do have that option as well. The Cloud SDDC to remote LDAP, you can set that up as well. And maybe even you want to enable Cloud SDDC to ESXi vMotion. So you do have the functionality and the features that are available to you to set up the accesses required for your environment. So do keep that in mind as far as the granularity. It's pretty much totally available, open to you how you want to make it as far as open as possible, or if you want to be as limited as possible, those options are totally available to you. And then with a cold migration. So Brian, do you want to discuss this and get into some of the details around this as well?
Yeah, thanks, Samir.
Sure.
So we'll just take a quick pause for a second before I continue on here. While Samir was talking, I was reading through the questions. A lot of great questions coming in. I want to let you all know I was able to answer a couple as he spoke. stay on. We're going to have time for a Q&A at the end of this. We should have about 15 minutes of Q&A. We'll get through as many of those questions as we can. So keep those questions coming, and we'll try and have the additional panelists answer as many as they can while we're talking. But the rest of them, if they're not being answered right now, don't be dismayed. We'll get to those here after we get through a few more slides. So thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about cold migration. So we mentioned this a little bit before. Cold migration means the VM needs to be powered off to be moved. Now, a cold migration will need to be powered, or a VM for cold migration will need to be powered off, but we also need to have our VPNs connected for our compute and management gateways in VMware Cloud on AWS. What that means is that our cloud SDDC needs a VPN connection back to our on-prem environment to make this work. Our on-prem environment needs to be 60U3 or later, or 650D or later for this to work. Now the reason is because we leverage what we call hybrid linked mode that I talked about earlier. Hybrid linked mode allows us to see the inventory and work with both environments at the same time. Now being able to do that requires these versions of vSphere or newer. So if you don't have those, you can't actually go in like you see in this picture, right click on a virtual machine from your on-prem environment and migrate it. You need to make sure you have your firewall rules set both on-prem and in the cloud SDDC to allow for this type of traffic. And you need to make sure that you're on either a standard switch or distributed switch that's 6.x. Now, there were some questions that came up in the chat as well about this. If you have something that is older than this, that is where hybrid cloud extension or HCX would come into play. And we'll talk about that more in the questions and answers section. But just know if you have anything lower than this, we do have ways for you to get those workloads up into the cloud very easily. It is just not through this through this functionality. So let's walk through, just for the sake of time, we did this as a recording because I didn't want you to all have to sit here for 5 minutes or so while our workloads were moving. But let me go ahead and start this and we can walk through how this would work. So a cold migration, like I said, will allow you to move workloads on-prem up to the cloud and back. Here you can see that we have our VPN set up. And you can see we've got our firewall rules 902, 903, and any to our hosts. If we log into our on-prem environment, and this is the same vCenter that everyone here is used to, you'll see at the very top our cloud SDDC, but what we have highlighted there is our on-prem environment. So if we expand our on-prem environment, we'll choose a virtual machine, we'll right-click it and power it down for this cold migration. And then we'll go through the steps that you normally would do even for a vMotion, which is right click on the virtual machine, click on migrate, and then you have to choose to change both your compute and storage resources, right? We're moving this from one vCenter in one location to another. So here we go in and we choose the resource pool where this virtual machine will reside. And then we have to go through and do several different compatibility validations, right? So that's for everything from storage, where it's going to exist, which network it's going to be a part of in the new vCenter. And once we've chosen all these things, then it will go through and do one final validation, and then we can click finish. And what you'll see at the bottom of the screen once we click finish is the task of it relocating that virtual machine. And it is relocating that from our on-prem, this one was in Washington, I believe, Washington State, to VMware Cloud on AWS in the Oregon region. Once that's done, we can go ahead and expand our VMware Cloud on AWS environment, and we can see that our VM is there. Just to show that this is bidirectionally capable, we're going to go ahead and we're going to migrate this back down on-prem. So we'll follow the same steps that we did to move this up into VMware Cloud on AWS, and we'll move this back down into our on-prem environment. So as you can see, we do have the capability for bidirectional moves, but what I'm really trying to point out here is the simplicity in making the move up to the cloud. Okay, it was several clicks of the mouse. You could do this via API, via Power CLI, or any of our SDKs, and you can script this to do bulk. You can even do bulk migrations through the vSphere client itself. So let's talk about some of our customers and the successes that we've seen. So Black Mountain is one of our customers that is allowing us to share their story, and they're an investment management firm, and they had a need to get out of a colo facility where their lease was expiring. So they needed to move a bunch of production workloads from this colo to somewhere else, and they didn't want to be incurring downtime. What they ended up doing is they leveraged hybrid cloud extension, like we talked about, HCX, to actually move over 400 virtual machines, over 30 terabytes of storage, and they did all of this in roughly 20 days with no downtime. So they were able to take their workloads. They didn't have to do anything additional as far as upgrading any of their on-prem environment. They didn't have to worry about changing anything at the physical network. They deployed HCX, opened a few ports, and pretty much just started this migration going. The great thing about this is not only did they have zero downtime, they got out in the time that they needed to. They were able to move 30 terabytes on a very small, well, it depends on where you live, 100 megabit connection. And they didn't have to change the format, which means their VMDKs are the same in VMware Cloud as they were in their colo. Their backup solutions will work with VMware like they did in their colo. Their scripts, their APIs, everything will continue to work the same way that it was working when it was in the colo. It's essentially just move locations. But now they've also added the capabilities of being able to add additional hosts in 10 minutes or less, be able to tie into AWS services and features. So they've done all this in a record amount of time and at scale. But they're not the only ones. So if you take a look at some of these, obviously this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of our customers that we have. And you may recognize some of those as being VMware partners, some of them as MSPs, some of them as customers themselves of VMware consuming it that way. We have customers across the board consuming this in many, many different ways. So one of the last things I want to talk about, this is me giving you permission to pull up your phone. If you have your phone out in front of you, you can see there's a QR code in the top right of my screen. We have a newer offering called a single node SDDC. VMware Cloud on AWS at this point requires 4 nodes for the cluster. However, for a number of people, a number of VMware customers that want to give VMware Cloud on AWS a try, but that don't need all those resources yet, can use this single node SDDC to try out VMware Cloud on AWS. What this allows you to do is go in and do an hourly payment for a single host that has all the same virtual machines, the same software. HCX is bundled with this as well, and you get it for 30 days. Obviously, if you use it for 2 hours and then delete it, you only pay for the 2 hours. If you use it for the entire month, you get billed for the entire month and then delete it. You can easily, with about 2 clicks of a mouse, if you decide you want to keep that SDDC, you can scale that up to the 4 hosts minimum that we have and keep running with it. So that QR code, for those of you that can pull out your phones and scan that, will take you directly to a link where you can sign up and get more information about the single node. You obviously don't get billed until you deploy your SDDC. So you can go ahead and sign up, get more information about all this, and if you choose to try out the one node and VMware Cloud on AWS offering, you can do that here. Samir, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Brian. So we'll go over some of the VMware Cloud on AWS resources. So for example, you do have the option of going to several web pages. With VMware Cloud, the home pages, so aws.amazon.com/VMware, cloud.vmware.com/vmc-aws. Then also do check out the blog posts that are available at blog.cloud.vmware.com. They're very informative. You do get some technical information in regards to how to do certain things, how to leverage VMware Cloud on AWS. So definitely check those out. And then also with the YouTube channel, there is particular videos in regard to VMware Cloud on AWS, some of the use cases, how to utilize it, even setting it up and deploying it. It's very good as far as getting hands-on and learning about the services itself. And then also check out the TCO tools that are available to you. So you can go to cloud.vmware.com/vnc-aws-pricing. And then also at vmcsizer.vmware.com/home. So there are two different tools to think about. So with the first one that I mentioned, that's going to go through the pricing for you. It does obviously show the pricing that's listed and the discount programs and all that are offered around it. And then also, if you're looking from a TCO perspective from a finance side, I would definitely check out the VMC Sizer tool that's mentioned as the second link as well. That does go into some of the details. You do have the option to provide input of your own data into that, and then from that, it will calculate the output as far as the specific TCO based on those inputs that you provided. So definitely take a look at those resources that are available to you. Yeah, so I guess with that, are there any questions that we want to go through or take at this moment?
All right, Kate, what's the best way for us to go through some of these questions? Do you want us just to look through all of them and start answering the unanswered ones, or do you guys have specific ones picked out that you'd like to ask us? All right, well, I will go ahead and look through some of the questions here. So a question here, when should I use vMotion versus HCX for migration? Is there a number of VMs being migrated before making this decision? So really, you can go through and choose. I hope we've laid this out well for you guys. HCX can be used anytime. One of the benefits of HCX is you can do bulk migrations and schedule when they fell over, which is really nice. HCX also doesn't have as stringent of requirements for things such as their live migrations. So their live migrations, I do not remember off the top of my head, but you have you can use lower speeds as far as your bandwidth is concerned, and have a little bit higher latency than what we normally do with vMotion. Let's see.
So I think another good one that came up was the question, would we have full control of the ESXi hosts and the responsibility for operating them? So I think, one of the key things and one of the powerful things with this partnership, it comes down to the infrastructure, the VMware stack that's being provided to you. So think about it from the ESXi host. You are limited from the standpoint where you don't have root access to the host. You can't deploy any vids that interact with the host from like a VM kernel standpoint. But as far as the upgrading that takes place, or the upgrades related to the whole VMware stack, that's all done for you. So you no longer have to worry about those upgrades. You do get proactive notifications in regards to that. So it's not just something that happens off the whim. You are alerted and kept in the loop from that. So just think about the ease of management that comes with VMware Cloud on AWS.
Great, thank you. Another question here, how much is maintenance on average for AWS for University? So our pricing is all up on our website. Samir, if you still have control of the deck, do you want to go back to the resources page, and we can just leave those links up?
Sure.
So the maintenance, the great thing about VMware Cloud on AWS is you're paying for everything packaged together. So that is your hardware, the software, so vSphere, NSX, vSAN, and the maintenance is included in there as well. So VMware actually goes in and does all the updates. And as of since we initially released VMware Cloud on AWS, we've actually been doing quarterly updates. And that's one of the things that you'll see is that we will be doing revisions much faster than you do in an on-prem environment. So all of this is bundled in together. You don't ever have to worry about doing your maintenance, your upgrades, your firmware, any of that. That's all taken care of by us, and that's all priced together. Which level of NSX functionality do you get with the AWS offering? Okay, Chris, that's a great question. So currently, you get NSX. It's in more of a basic mode currently, and you'll see that change here as we move towards leveraging NSXT which is NSX transformers, that gives you the ability to do things like distributed firewalls, leverage pretty much all of the different portions of NSX. Now, like I said, as of right now, it's the basic version, so you're able to do routing, you're able to do firewall rules, and so on and so forth. You'll get into the distributed firewalls and everything else here very shortly. Samir, do you have any that you want to take?
Yeah, so I guess, this is a good one that keeps coming up as far as how to utilize the migration services. So for example, the question was asked, is there a way to estimate how long it would take to migrate all my workloads? What are some of the considerations that would impact migration time? So there's no real quick, easy way to just define how long it will take to migrate your workloads. One of the key things to keep in mind that is dependent on the bandwidth that you have and the method that you're utilizing. So you do have that option to either stretch your network and take care of a live motion. You do have the option to utilize even something like HCX as well. So it depends which route you want to go, which option you're going with, and also which connectivity option you're utilizing. So that's going to impact the time. And then obviously the size of the VM is also going to impact this as well. So those are some of the considerations just to take into account when you are going through that exercise of thinking about how long it will take. Though I do want to, put it out there where HCX is amazing. I've seen it used by customers. And as far as migrating a bulk load of VMs, it does a phenomenal job with that.
Great. So let's get through a few more here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to find the one, maybe someone already answered it. The question was, how does this tie into things such as S3 and other AWS functionality? The great thing about this is the fact that because VMware Cloud on AWS, the hosts are housed in the same data centers and regions, obviously, as the AWS services, Amazon has gone ahead and done some engineering that allows us to take advantage of some of those services without actually going through the internet gateway. So it goes over, in AWS terms, an elastic network interface. That allows you to do things such as consume S3 without having egress fees. So for example, we have some customers that like to back up their virtual machines to an S3 or bucket. Their backup repository is an S3 bucket. Now, if they were to download those again in case of a site failure, or if they needed to fail over to these, they would incur a transit cost because it's egress data transfers back on-prem. And that can add up if you're doing terabytes and terabytes or petabytes of data transfer. That same customer, however, if they decided to redeploy those from backups into VMware Cloud on AWS, they can take advantage of this ENI or the integrations with AWS services. And because it's not going through the internet gateway, it's not going out of the data centers, there are no transfer fees, and it goes over a very high bandwidth, low latency connection. So definitely some things to think about when you're looking at costs and AWS services is being able to leverage this. Now, really the only things that you need to set up for that, as far as S3 is concerned, is an S3 endpoint. And for the other AWS services, you just need to make sure that your firewall rules on the VMware side and security groups on the AWS side are enabled to allow traffic to flow between your own VPC and the AWS environment, or the VMware environment, excuse me.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, Brian. I think also to that note, when you do deploy your SDDC, where you specify your AWS account number and ID as well, it will populate with the VPCs that exist in that AWS account. So you do have the option to connect with your AWS VPC. So when you deploy your SDDC, you will go through that option through the GUI wizard where you can have that linked. So that is one of the quick, easy ways of leveraging the native AWS services. So you do have that option available to you as well. One of the other questions that came up was in regard to site recovery. So we didn't necessarily hit upon that in today's webinar, But you do have the option to leverage Site Recovery Manager with your on-premises environment, and then Site Recovery with VMware Cloud on AWS. So maybe you're looking to protect your certain VMs. You do have that flexibility to do that. And if you're leveraging it from a DR standpoint, when a DR situation was to take place, you do have an automated way to bring up your VMs. So that's something to keep in mind, and definitely we'll keep that in mind for future webinars as well.
All right, so I saw another one here. Great questions around some of the networking. I'm actually impressed. So there was a question here around how do we isolate specific customer networks on VMware Cloud on AWS, as well as another one around how do you go from NSX in VMware Cloud on AWS to the AWS services. So I'll try and hit both of those in the same question. So everything is isolated already. So just as AWS, your VPC that you would have as an AWS customer is isolated from other customers' networks, right? The same thing applies here. The only thing that's different is that you have that ability to leverage the Elastic Network Interface between a specific VPC in your account and your VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So we're able to go in, and when we deploy an SDDC, we create this additional connection into a VPC that you specify when you deploy your SDDC. And once it creates that connection for you, you're able to talk to objects or services running that are connected to that VPC. Outside of that, you can't talk to other AWS services, you can't talk to other AWS accounts, obviously, unless it goes over through the internet gateway and comes through a public IP on that end, which would be like, you know, a load balancer or a web server or something of that sort. So just so you know, it leverages Amazon's technologies there as far as being able to keep every customer isolated from the other. Another one, just sorry to continue on with that. The VMware Cloud on AWS vSphere management and vMotion networks, are they managed by VMC? The answer is yes. So those are set up. We have a way for you to go in and connect via VPN to the management network, right? So that you can leverage things such as vMotion. But all of the hardware and configuration, as far as that's concerned, is managed by VMware Cloud on AWS.
I think another good one related to networking questions is it possible to retain IP address assignment when migrating a VM to the cloud so that I don't have to re-IP my server and reconfigure my application? So certainly, you do have that option to extend your network from on-premises to VMware Cloud on AWS. So with that, when you do layer 2 stretch networks, you do have the option where you don't have to re-IP your VMs when they're vMotion from on-premises to VMware Cloud on AWS. So you don't have to go through re-IPing. You don't have to reconfigure your application. So do keep that in mind, as those features are available and provided to you as an option.
Great. Another question, Wendy, is the VM host you are on dedicated to you or shared with other customers? So that's a really good question that we get a lot. So the question in other terms is this nested virtualization where I'm sharing this host with other people and we have virtualization within virtualization, or do we get the entire host? Now the answer to this is that you get the entire host. So you get an entire EC2 host if you do a single node for 30 days, or you get a 4-node environment, which gives you 4 full EC2 hosts. So depending on your needs, right, you may want to try out the single node first and see how well that runs and try your use cases there. But at any given time, at no time at all, ever, are you sharing a host with another customer in the cloud. And then can we align on-prem upgrades and patching with AWS VMware patching? So that question, the short answer is no, you cannot, because your on-prem versions are released, usually if you look at our previous history, we usually release major versions every 12 to 18 months. VMware Cloud on AWS, we're releasing patches pretty much quarterly. So it would be very difficult for you to get into the same bits on-prem as you do in the cloud for those reasons.
There's a question from David as far as AWS regions have multiple data centers in a region. All my data is spread across 3 data centers. Is that still the case with VMware Cloud on AWS? So I think one of the key things to remember is we've been deploying the service in various regions. And then within regions, you have availability zones. So they're cluster data centers. Availability zones, when we say that, they're on different fault plans. They have different utility lines, different network connections coming in. So there's no one single point of failure from that standpoint where there's redundancy in place. But in this case, with VMware Cloud on AWS, when you deploy your SDC, you do pick the AZ that you want to utilize. Though now you do also have that option where if you want to stretch multiple AZs, by all means, you have that option available to you. So if you want to have a SDC deployed where it's going from more than one SDDC, you do have that option. So by all means, do keep that in mind.
Great. I had another question here. Said, I noticed security tags are not available in NSX in the VMware Cloud on AWS offering. Do you know if this feature will be added in the near future? This impacts our ability to migrate. The short answer is yes, they will be there in the near future once NSXT has been released for VMware Cloud on AWS, which we've talked about in our public roadmap as well. So once we get to NSXT, it opens up the ability for all of the tagging features that you would have on-prem as well. So with that, all I can say is stay tuned. I can't give you the specific time and date because I'll get in trouble for that, but know that that is coming. Let's see, still a lot of questions here. I'll do one more and then I'll let you take over and do a couple here.
Sure.
Oh, I just lost it. We use services like WAF while using VMware on AWS? This is a great question. So I did some blog posts. You won't see that on this webinar, and I won't share out the link here because it's a personal blog. But you can Google being able to use load balancers with VMware Cloud on AWS, and you most certainly can leverage things such as WAF, the application load balancers or the elastic load balancers, the ELB. Version 2 is the application version that allows you to actually point from your AWS load balancer to the private IP addresses of virtual machines running in the VMware stack of VMware Cloud on AWS. So that's one of the great things is as we start talking with customers, the big question is, can we do X, can we do Y with different AWS services? And the answer is almost always yes. And then we turn around and we say, what else can you do with your environment by tying in your VMware stack with different AWS services? How does that change the dynamic of your environment? You know, what benefits can you get from leveraging things such as vMotion and vSphere HA and our scheduler over provisioning and thin provisioning of storage, while at the same time leveraging the on-demand pricing for the different services, all the many services that you can get with AWS. How can we intermix these to give you, the customer, the best of both worlds? And so really, as you go through this, you know, mobility is the first step. So this whole webinar is great because it talks about how you can get your workloads from on-prem up into the cloud. The second step moving forward then is, what can I do to integrate this better? What can I do to make my life easier by integrating with AWS services?
Yeah. So another question in regards to the overall services, as far as are customers expected to reserve an ESXi host for failover capacity out of the purchase pool? So one of the key things to keep in mind is if you were to utilize the minimum 4 host deployment for a production-based environment, and then if you need additional hosts, you do have the flexibility to add the additional hosts as needed. So currently you can go up to 32 hosts per cluster. So that is something to keep in mind. Though if you do want to expand out where you start off with 4 hosts and maybe you want to add another host due to compute or any type of storage resources, you do have that option available to you. So pretty much it's just going into the GUI, so at the VMware Cloud on AWS console, and then you would see a button that says add host. So it's literally as easy as it sounds.
All right, how are the admin accounts controlled, and do you support SSO? So what happens when you deploy an SDDC? So there's a couple different accounts here that I'll make sure we clarify. You have your VMware Cloud on AWS account. Now, when you go into your VMware Cloud on AWS account, you can go in and add additional users to log in and be able to deploy SDDCs. From there, if you deploy an SDDC, that vCenter is going to have a default username and password given to you when it deploys, and you'll see that in the console. Once you log in, the idea here is that you'd set up connections to, for example, Active Directory or hybrid linked mode that ties into your on-prem identity source. When you do that, you then have essentially single sign-on between environments. And I think with that, we're at the top of the hour. I would say that any of these other questions that we haven't answered yet, we'll take a look at these. We'll get these offline and see what additional ones we can answer. I'm not sure how the platform works, if we can send these out in emails to you for your specific questions, but we will try and go ahead and answer all the rest of these that we weren't able to get to.
Definitely. Thank you for your time, everyone. Appreciate it.